Now, Justin, you teach in a Catholic high school and you've written about teaching as a profession and as a vocation. Can you describe the spirituality of an educator? In other words, what ways do teachers most emulate Jesus?
Well, Jesus is the teacher par excellence. He is the master teacher. Someone recently asked me which is my favorite gospel of the four canonical gospels. Which is my favorite? And I had to go with Matthew because Matthew is the great teaching gospel. So when you look at how in Matthew you have, of course, the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5, 6, and 7. You have the Sermon on the Mount. You have so many great episodes within Matthew in which Jesus is reinforcing his role as teacher, when he is reinforcing the law, if you will, with himself being the law. Sometimes we have an adverse response to the word law. We might view it in a rigid way. We might view it as simply an imposition of some standards and so forth. But really, the law that Christ brings is the law of love. One of my favorite passages is where Jesus tells us in John's Gospel, if you love me, you will keep my commandments. That's sometimes a neglected saying of Jesus's, but it really is important. You look at why he gives us the expectations that he does. So in terms of the spirituality of a Catholic school teacher, really it's one of relying on the Lord first and foremost. The more you let Jesus do what he does, the easier your, and I hesitate to call it this, but the easier your job will be. The easier your vocation truly will be. The more you let the Holy Spirit do the work.
With the rapid advancements in technology and the current state of the world's economy and globalization as a whole, how do you envision the future of education, especially Catholic education?
Catholic education has to constantly look at what the mission is. Technology comes and goes. I like really looking at the word technology in order to see and to remind ourselves that technology does not simply mean gadgets or gizmos or electronics. Those are facets of technology, but fire was once the biggest thing on the scene. The wheel was once the biggest thing on the scene. The television, the internet, the calculator, the pencil, paper. We could look at any of these things and see how they're technological components. What is the overall goal of, if you will, these different tools? And that is to accomplish a purpose. So the methodology is going to shift and change, if you will, from one generation to the next. In terms of different methodologies, they're going to come into popularity. They're going to go out of popularity. There are going to be new technologies. There are going to be shifts in technology. But what remains the same is the proclamation of the gospel, the proclamation of the good news of Jesus Christ. Bring the three theological virtues of faith, hope, and love into the world. I often give my students the example, if you have a dear relative who's on his or her deathbed, okay, you're not going to say to that person, oh, well, it's okay. Let me just, bring you this robot in order to keep you company. Let me just bring you this device in order to talk to you. They're going to want an authentic experience, a human being. Pope Francis often talks about the encounter, el encuentro, as we say in Spanish. It's more than simply a meeting. It's a presence of a person. So in terms of that capital P person, the better Catholic educators are able to bring the Lord to their students. The methods are going to change. The tools are going to change. The approaches are going to change. But at the end of the day, the message of Jesus Christ is what endures.
That's awesome. Thanks, Justin. And what does it take to teach the whole student?
Teaching the whole student. First and foremost, we need to convey to students that they are people first and learners second. We've had a tendency over the last few decades to view students in some ways as a commodity. And that really is a tragedy. That's a humanitarian nightmare, viewing students as simply test takers, as somebody to get a grade, to perform some sort of service to society. We're viewing students in a far too functional way instead of viewing them as creations of the Almighty. You know, when you look all the way at the beginning of Genesis 1, 26 and 27, we see that we're made in God's image and likeness. So if he created us in his image and likeness, then we're called to reflect him. So in terms of the modern state of education, if you will, with students, we have to look at students as ends rather than as means to giving something to society. And that's not in a self-serving way. Really, the end, if you will, of Catholic education is the profession of the gospel, the proclamation of the gospel. So when you look at, if you will, what that means for forming the whole person, it is making disciples for Jesus Christ. Now, how do we do that? It's through encouraging students to live the gospel. One issue we have in modern times, and this is, I don't know if the word is an accurate one, but it's a pet peeve of mine, and that is that sometimes we get too caught up in, when I say we, I mean as a society. This is not just a school issue, it's society. We get too caught up in activism without the core being actual social justice. We, have the flavor of the month in terms of, whatever the new cause is. And then, once that falls out of popularity, we move on to another one. And that really is problematic because it's simple emotionalism rather than actually looking at the charity that underlies it. I always remind my students, even if you have an F, it doesn't mean that, you're not going to get into heaven. Even though you have an A, it doesn't mean that, your salvation is de facto guaranteed. That's just simply a reflection of academic output. The goal is to bring you closer to the Lord. When somebody is able to embrace a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, then everything falls into place.